My name is Maisie Black. At 29 years old, as a captain in the United States Marine Corps, I thought I understood the meaning of honor, courage, and commitment. But at the polished dining table in the very San Diego home I grew up in, those values meant nothing. Tonight at the dinner party meant to honor my sister, Sam. My mother looked at me with a cold, analytical gaze. You know, she said, her voice crystal clear for everyone to hear, if you'd focused on a real career instead of this playing soldier thing, you might have something to show for yourself by now. Honestly, Maisie, you're not half the woman your sister is. The words landed like a sledgehammer, stealing the air from the room. I took a slow, deep breath, the same measured technique I'd used under enemy fire. They had no idea that my game of playing soldier had been paying the mortgage on this house for the last 4 years, and I had the receipts for every single cent. If you have ever poured your blood, sweat, and tears into something only to be treated like a disappointment, let me know where you're from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe because you are about to witness a takedown they never saw coming. The house was a stage, and tonight, the spotlight was entirely on my sister, Sam. Our family's suburban San Diego home was flooded with warm, expensive lighting and the kind of laughter that sounds too bright to be real. It was a performance, and I was merely a prop. I sat at the long mahogany table, my back ramrod straight. A posture drilled into me at Quantico, now an unconscious habit. My evening dress felt like a costume, a poor disguise for the soldier underneath. My father, Charles, stood at the head of the table, tapping his champagne flute with a manicured nail. The crystal chimed, silencing the manufactured chatter. "A toast," he announced, his voice booming with a pride he reserved exclusively for his firstborn. "To my daughter, Sam. Not only has she made partner, but she is officially the youngest associate in the history of her firm." A chorus of "Hear, hear," and polite applause rippled through the room. I watched Sam, her smile perfectly modest as she basked in the glow of adoration. I loved my sister, I truly did. But in this house, her light always cast me in shadow. I tried to join the chorus, to be part of the celebration. She always had incredible leadership skills, I offered, my voice clear and measured. Even back in college, she could organize any project, motivate anyone. My words drifted into the air and vanished. It was as if I hadn't spoken at all. "Sam, darling, have you told them what Judge Albright said about your closing argument?" Charles interrupted, his attention already locked back onto his star. Just like that, the spotlight swiveled back, and I was once again invisible. I felt a familiar, dull ache settle in my chest. I wasn't a daughter here. I was a placeholder, a piece of furniture arranged to make the room look full. A soldier in civilian clothes with no rank and no role on this particular battlefield. The rest of the dinner was a masterclass in subtle dismissals, a series of invisible wounds that bled internally. My mother, Elaine, drifted around the table, a queen surveying her court. She didn't ask about my recent deployment or the commendation I'd received. Her interactions with me were purely transactional. "Maisie, pass the roasted potatoes," she commanded without making eye contact, her focus on a cousin sitting across from me. Later, I made another attempt to connect, to share a piece of my world. "We just implemented a new logistics system I helped design," I started, trying to explain a genuine professional achievement. "It streamlined supply chain management in theater by almost 20%. It's a real game changer." "Oh, that's interesting, dear," Elaine said, her smile as thin as a razor's edge. Before I could say another word, she turned to our Aunt Carol. "Did you hear? Sam's firm is already considering her for a senior partnership position. They've never done that so quickly." My throat tightened. The words caught behind a wall of frustration. I commanded Marines. I was responsible for the lives of men and women, for millions of dollars in government assets. I made decisions that had real, tangible consequences. But in this room, my accomplishments were less interesting than idle gossip. Here, I wasn't a captain. I was just Sam's less successful younger sister. The final assault came disguised as motherly concern. As dessert, a ridiculously ornate tiramisu was served. Elaine fixed her cold, analytical gaze on me. It was the same look she used when spotting a scuff on her Italian leather shoes. You know, Maisie, she began, her voice dropping into a tone of what she called helpful advice. If you'd focused on a real career instead of this playing soldier thing, you might have something to show for yourself by now. Playing soldier. The phrase echoed in the sudden quiet. She made my life's work, the uniform I wore with honor, the sacrifices I'd made, sound like a child's game. My jaw tightened, but my voice remained steady. A feat of discipline that cost me everything. I serve my country, Mom. Elaine let out a long, theatrical sigh and exchanged a knowing, pitying look with my father. Service is a noble thing, dear, she said, patting my hand as if I were a simple-minded child. But it isn't success, is it? She gestured vaguely towards Sam, who was now engaged in an animated conversation about real estate in La Jolla. It doesn't build anything. And then, she delivered the kill shot. She leaned in slightly, her voice just loud enough for the entire table to hear. A public execution of my worth. Honestly, Maisie, you're not half the woman your sister is. The room went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Laughter died in people's throats. The invisible bullet had found its mark, piercing straight through the armor of my training, my rank, my pride. It struck the very core of who I was. For a split second, the pain was so sharp, so absolute, that I thought I might break. But in that crushing silence, something else took over. The iron discipline of the Marine Corps, forged in the crucible of Paris Island and hardened by years of service, won out over the hurt. A switch flipped inside me. 4 years of silent sacrifice. 4 years of wiring my paycheck home to cover their emergencies. 4 years of being invisible, of being their secret, shameful safety net. It all came to a head in that one crystallizing moment. The daughter in me died, and the captain took command. My posture didn't change. My expression remained neutral. When I spoke, my voice was low, steady, and devoid of any emotion. It was the voice I used to give orders in the field, a voice that carried an authority they had never heard before. Then maybe she should be the one paying the mortgage on this house. My words had the effect of a flashbang grenade tossed onto the dinner table. There was a sharp clatter as my father's fork slipped from his grasp and hit his plate. Sam froze mid-sip of her champagne, her eyes wide with confusion. My mother's face, just moments ago flushed with pride, turned a sickly shade of pale. She attempted a clumsy deflection, forcing a brittle laugh. "Well now," Elaine chirped, her voice an octave too high. "Who's ready for some dessert? I believe it's tiramisu tonight." She started to rise, a desperate maneuver to change the subject, to pretend the grenade was never thrown. But I was trained to hold my ground. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it carried the unmistakable authority of a commanding officer. It cut through her false cheer and nailed her back to her seat. The air crackled with a tension so thick you could taste it. My father, Charles, finally found his voice, sputtering with indignation. "Mortgage? What on earth are you talking about? We refinanced years ago. The house is perfectly secure." He was trying to project confidence, but a tremor in his hand betrayed his panic. I calmly placed my napkin on the table and pulled out my phone. My movements were deliberate, economical. I was no longer their daughter, the emotional punching bag. I was an officer conducting a briefing. "Is that so?" I replied, my voice cool and even. "Because I think the Navy Federal Credit Union might have a different story." I tapped the screen, the cool light illuminating my face in the dimming room. I was ready for this war. I had been preparing for it for 4 years without even realizing it. "Let's review the operational history," I said, my tone flat, as if I were reading an after-action report at Camp Pendleton. February 15th, 2021. I read the date aloud, letting it hang in the air. A wire transfer for $2,500. The purpose noted was foreclosure prevention. You told me it was a one-time thing, just to get back on your feet. I swiped my thumb across the screen, moving to the next entry. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of my voice, a relentless drumbeat of facts. March 2021. $1,200 for a property tax shortfall. April, 1,800 for an unexpected plumbing disaster. May, 2,400 for a roof repair. Month after month. For 4 years. Each entry was a nail in the coffin of their perfect family facade. Each number was an undeniable testament to their lies. Elaine made another move to escape, pushing her chair back violently. I will not sit here and be insulted. Leaving the table doesn't make the truth disappear, ma'am, I called after her, my use of the formal address a deliberate blade. She froze halfway to the kitchen. My father tried a different tactic, attempting to sound reasonable, paternal. Maisie, there were some temporary setbacks. Every business has them. 4 years isn't temporary, Dad. I cut him off, my gaze unwavering. That's a sustained campaign. Then I turned my attention to my sister. Sam looked utterly horrified, her face a mask of disbelief as she looked from me to our parents and back again. The perfect world she inhabited was crumbling around her. Sam, I asked, my voice softening just a fraction. While you were building your empire in LA, winning cases and making partner, did you have any idea who was keeping the roof over this house? She shook her head slowly, her words barely a whisper. No. Mom and Dad said. They said they were sending you money. Her eyes filled with a dawning, sickening understanding. They told me that military pay wasn't enough to live on, that you were struggling. A laugh escaped my lips. It wasn't a sound of humor. It was a dry, bitter, rattling sound, the noise of a final illusion shattering into a million pieces. This was the ultimate deception. It wasn't enough for them to exploit me. They had to assassinate my character behind my back, painting me as a failure and a charity case to the one person whose respect I might have still craved. They had made me pathetic in my sister's eyes. They said that? I asked, my voice dropping to an icy whisper. What a touching story. My mother, cornered and exposed, turned back from the doorway. She drew on her last and most potent weapon, emotional manipulation. Her eyes filled with tears, her voice quivering with manufactured hurt. It's called family obligation, Maisie. You do what you have to do for family. But the guilt she had weaponized for years was now useless. I was immune. I wasn't family, I stated, the words cold and hard as granite. I was a contingency fund, an emergency line of credit with a heartbeat. The room was silent again, the remaining guests looking anywhere but at the wreckage of the Black family. It was Sam who broke the spell. She had processed the shock, and the lawyer in her took over, seeking the bottom line. How much, Maisie? She asked, her voice trembling but clear. What's the total? I finally looked away from my parents. I swept my gaze across the entire table, meeting the eyes of every aunt, every uncle, every cousin who had ever looked at me with that same subtle pity. I let them all see me, really see me, for the first time. Then I looked straight at my mother and father. I said the number. $84,000. A collective gasp went through the room. The number was obscene, incomprehensible. It was more than a number. It was a verdict. It was the price of their lies, the cost of their lifestyle, the weight of their betrayal. My father sank back into his chair as if he'd been physically struck. 84,000, I repeated, letting the words sink in, letting every single person in that room feel their impact. That was my down payment on a house with a VA loan. That was my transition fund for when I re-entered civilian life. That was the future you stole from me, piece by piece, month by month. A profound, suffocating silence descended upon the room. The party was over. The perfect image was shattered beyond repair. The truth was out, ugly and undeniable. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt free. $84,000. The number didn't just appear overnight. It was a debt accumulated not through loans or bad investments, but through 1,000 cuts of loyalty, guilt, and a daughter's misguided sense of duty. The campaign against my future began 4 years ago, not on a battlefield, but in the sterile quiet of my barracks room at Camp Pendleton. It was 2 a.m. I remember the smell of gun oil, sharp and metallic, as I meticulously cleaned my M4 service rifle after a grueling week of field exercises. My muscles ached, my mind was exhausted. But the methodical ritual of breaking down and reassembling my weapon was calming. It was order. It was control. Everything my family life was not. Then my phone buzzed, vibrating against the cold steel of my footlocker. It was my mother. A call at 0200 from home could only mean one thing: an emergency. I was right. Her voice came through the line, not with the usual passive-aggressive undertones, but in a full-blown, panicked sob. "They're going to take the house, Maisie," she wailed, each word cracking with manufactured despair. "Your father, his business. It's all gone. We're going to lose everything." She was a masterful actress. She painted a vivid, horrifying picture of ruin and public shame: the foreclosure sign on the lawn, the humiliation in front of the neighbors, the specter of homelessness. She didn't just ask for help, she appealed to my core identity. She invoked the image of the soldier, the protector. It wasn't about money, it was about saving the family home, the repository of every childhood memory I held dear. "We just need $2,500 to keep the bank at bay," she pleaded, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Just this once. I promise we'll pay you back as soon as things turn around. Just this once." The four most expensive words I would ever hear. Sitting there, surrounded by the rigid discipline of my military life, I thought of that house. I thought of the scratch on the hardwood floor where I fell off my bike, the faded height chart marked in pencil on the kitchen doorframe. I was a Marine, trained to act decisively in a crisis. This felt like a crisis. So, I opened my laptop, the glow of the screen pushing back the darkness, and I wired the money. I had saved the house. I had done my duty. But just this once quickly became a familiar refrain. The next month, it was an unexpected tax bill from the IRS. The month after that, the transmission on my dad's car suddenly failed. Each call was a new performance, a new 5-act play of desperation and drama. The emotional weight of these calls began to wear me down. I grew tired of the theatrics, the carefully crafted stories, the constant state of manufactured crisis. So, by the 6th month, to save myself from the exhausting cycle of tear-filled phone calls, I did what a logistics officer does. I streamlined the process. I went into my military pay portal and set up a recurring allotment. It was a simple, automated deduction from my paycheck that went directly into their bank account. I had systemized my own exploitation. I had turned my financial bleed-out into a standard operating procedure, all for the illusion of peace. But that peace came at a steep price. My price. I watched younger Marines, fresh out of boot camp, use their VA loans to buy their first homes in Southern California before the market went completely insane. I saw the flyers for advanced career courses, specialized training in logistics and operations management that I had to turn down because I couldn't afford the travel and lodging costs. My own strategic goals were being sacrificed for their tactical emergencies. The irony was a bitter pill I swallowed daily. While my friends, my fellow Marines, went out for beers and tacos in Oceanside, I'd be in my room, quietly eating instant ramen, calculating if I had enough left over for gas until the next payday. And then I would scroll through Facebook, and the truest, most painful form of irony would slap me across the face. There would be a picture of my mother, cocktail in hand, on a cruise ship in Hawaii. The caption would read, "Finally enjoying the fruits of our hard work. Blessed." This posted just 3 days after a frantic call where she'd wept about a surprise medical bill that was going to ruin them. Another time, I saw a photo of my father on the golf course with a brand new set of Callaway clubs, a week after I'd sent money for that failed transmission. The disconnect was so profound, so insulting, that I started a private Excel spreadsheet on my laptop. It was my secret ledger of pain. Column A was labeled Funds Transferred to Family. Column B, Strategic Objectives Cancelled. The list in Column B grew longer and longer. Postpone master's degree. Cancel trip home for Christmas. Delay car purchase. That spreadsheet was a meticulous record of a slow-motion robbery. The breaking point, the moment of clarity, didn't come from me. It came from Gunnery Sergeant Jessica Reyes. Gunny Reyes was a force of nature, a woman carved from granite with 15 years of service under her belt. She had eyes that could see through steel, and she started noticing that her captain was getting thinner, quieter, and perpetually stressed. One Friday evening, at a small divey bar just outside the base, she cornered me. Over the noise of the jukebox and the clinking of pool balls, she looked me dead in the eye. "Spill it, Captain," she said, not as a request, but as an order. For the first time, I did. The whole, sordid, 4-year story came pouring out of me. She listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she took a long sip of her beer, set the bottle down with a decisive thud, and leaned forward. "Captain," she said, her voice completely devoid of judgment, "with all due respect, you cannot lie on a grenade to keep other people warm. This isn't a crisis, this is a business model. And you're the sole investor." That night, back in her office, she made me log into my bank account. We went through the records, line by line, adding it all up. My hands started to shake as the number on the calculator grew. When the final sum appeared on the screen, a wave of nausea washed over me. $84,000. It wasn't just a number. It wasn't just money. It was 4 years of lost opportunities. 4 years of a future I'd earned and then given away. Staring at that figure, a single, terrifying question echoed in the sudden silence of my mind. What am I doing with my life? If you've ever had that moment, that gut-wrenching realization that your kindness has been taken for weakness, support this story with a like. And in the comments, just type the word "enough" if you know what it feels like to finally reach your breaking point. The question Gunny Reyes had planted in my mind, "What am I doing with my life?" demanded an answer. And that answer couldn't be found in thoughts or words. It had to be an action. The next morning, I sat in my office at the Logistics Command building on base. Through the window, I watched a platoon of young Marines doing drills on the parade ground, their movements sharp and synchronized under the relentless California sun. They were building their futures, one grueling exercise at a time. I thought about the $84,000. I thought about Gunny's words, "You cannot lie on a grenade to keep other people warm." With a cold resolve I hadn't felt since my last deployment, I swiveled my chair to my computer. I logged into MyPay, the military's online payroll system. My fingers moved swiftly, navigating through the familiar menus until I reached the allotments page. There it was, a single, recurring line item that had been draining my lifeblood for 48 months. My cursor hovered over the small, unassuming cancel button. For a heartbeat, it felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. This wasn't just a click. It was a declaration of war. It was the severing of a toxic lifeline. I took a deep, steadying breath and pressed the button. A confirmation box popped up. "Are you sure you want to cancel this allotment?" I clicked. Yes. A wave of relief, so profound and immediate it almost made me dizzy, washed over me. It was as if a 50-pound pack I hadn't realized I was carrying had just been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in 4 years, my next paycheck would be entirely mine. I had retaken my primary objective, my own life. The fallout was swift and predictable. Like a blitzkrieg attack, the counteroffensive began exactly 2 days later, on the 15th of the month, when the automatic transfer failed to appear in their account. My phone, which had been blissfully silent, began to explode. First came a voicemail from my father. His voice, usually so smooth and confident, was laced with barely controlled fury. "Maisie, what the hell do you think you're doing? Do you have any idea what this irresponsible little stunt of yours is going to cause? You are abandoning your family." I didn't listen to the rest. I deleted the message, then I blocked his number. Next came the barrage from my mother. It was a masterclass in emotional warfare, a rapid escalation through a series of text messages. The first was deceptively sweet. "Hi, honey, just checking in. Is everything okay? We didn't get the transfer. Love you." When I didn't respond, the tone shifted to frantic worry, then to tearful guilt-tripping, and finally to venomous accusation. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? You are a cold, selfish girl, Maisie. You have no heart." I blocked her number, too. My silence became my new weapon. a fortified wall they couldn't breach. They had spent years conditioning me to react to their every emotional whim. My refusal to engage was a strategic maneuver they had never anticipated. But when direct fire failed, Charles and Elaine deployed their psychological warfare unit, the Flying Monkeys. My extended family. My Aunt Carol called, her voice thick with tears, sobbing about how devastated my parents were, how I was breaking their hearts. "Your mother can't even get out of bed, Maisie," she cried. "How could you be so cruel?" Then came a long, sanctimonious email from my Uncle Robert, lecturing me on the meaning of family duty and honor. He twisted the very values the Marine Corps had taught me, trying to use them against me. He painted me as a rogue agent, a disgrace to the family name. I showed the email to Gunny Reyes. She scanned it, took a sip of her coffee, and snorted. "Classic psyops," she said. "They're trying to isolate you, make you think you're the crazy one. Hold the line, Captain. Don't let them breach your defenses." Her words solidified my resolve. I drafted a single, polite, and impenetrable response. I copied and pasted it to every incoming text and email from a relative. "This is a private matter between me and my parents. Thank you for your concern." It was the civilian equivalent of no comment. It gave them nothing to argue with, nothing to twist. The final escalation came on a Sunday evening. I was in my small, rented apartment in Carlsbad, trying to find some peace in a book, when a frantic, angry banging rattled my front door. Not a knock, a banging. My heart leaped into my throat. I knew who it was. They had driven for nearly an hour, bypassing all my digital defenses to bring the fight to my doorstep. I opened the door to find my parents standing there, faces contorted with rage and desperation. Charles stormed past me without a word of greeting, his presence filling my small living room with a hostile energy. "You are destroying this family," he accused, pointing a finger at my face. Elaine followed, launching into a performance of theatrical sobs. "Your betrayal. It's making me sick, Maisie. I'm having chest pains because of the stress you're putting me under." But the young, easily manipulated girl they were looking for was gone. In her place stood a Marine captain who had faced down actual enemies, men with real weapons. Their emotional ammunition was useless against me now. I stood my ground in the doorway, blocking their full entry, my posture calm but unyielding. "My duty to this family," I said, my voice clear and steady, "does not include setting myself on fire to keep you warm. It does not require my own financial destruction." I looked them both in the eye, seeing them not as parents, but as what they had become. "I am not abandoning the family," I said, the words coming from a place of deep, newfound strength. "I am simply refusing to abandon myself any longer." I stepped back and opened the door wider, a clear, unmistakable gesture of dismissal. "You need to leave now." They stared at me, stunned into silence by this new, unbreakable version of their daughter. After a moment of sputtering, defeated rage, they turned and left. As I watched their car speed away, a profound sense of liberation washed over me. The storm had hit, and I was still standing. I had won the first battle. After the confrontation at my parents' house, an unnerving silence followed. The storm had passed, leaving behind a strange, empty quiet. The victory didn't feel triumphant. It felt hollow, like the eerie calm after a battle. I had won, but the cost was the final, fragile illusion of the family I thought I had. I had severed the financial tie, but the emotional amputation left a phantom limb that ached in the dead of night. The next 6 months were about rebuilding, not just my bank account, but my sense of self. Life slowly found a new, quieter rhythm. The first sign of this new chapter came during a formal promotion ceremony on base. Standing at attention, I felt a familiar mix of pride and anxiety as my commanding officer, a stern but fair colonel, prepared to pin the gold oak leaf insignia of a major onto my uniform. He read the official citation, his voice echoing across the parade ground, listing my accomplishments in logistics, my leadership during deployments, my dedication to the Corps. It was a formal, impersonal speech, but the words felt solid, real. After pinning the rank on my shoulders, he shook my hand firmly. Leaning in slightly, He lowered his voice so only I could hear. "We're proud of you, Major," he said, his eyes meeting mine with genuine respect, both in and out of uniform. That simple, quiet acknowledgement, spoken from a man whose respect was earned, not given, landed with more weight than any hollow praise I'd ever heard in my parents' home. It was a validation based on merit, not manipulation. That day, I walked off the parade ground feeling taller. I started rebuilding my savings, meeting with a financial advisor on base who specialized in military transitions. And for the first time, I felt like I was actually charting my own course, not just plugging holes in a sinking ship. My true support network, my chosen family, solidified around me. Gunny Reyes and the Marines in my immediate unit, who had pieced together the story through barracks gossip and their own sharp observations, closed ranks. They didn't offer pity, they offered solidarity. One Saturday, they ambushed me with a surprise promotion party. I drove down to the fire pits at Del Mar Beach, expecting a quiet afternoon, and found them all there. They had strung up a huge, hand-painted banner between two palm trees. In messy block letters, it read, "Congrats, Major Black, our family." The smell of barbecue, hot dogs and burgers sizzling on the grill, mingled with the salty air. Kids were running around, music was playing from a portable speaker, and the vibe was nothing like the tense, performative atmosphere of my parents' parties. This was real. This was easy. Gunny Reyes threw a heavy arm over my shoulder, handing me a cold beer. "In the Corps," she said, her voice gruff but warm, her gaze fixed on the waves crashing on the shore. "We never let one of our own fight alone, not overseas, and damn sure not at home." Standing there, surrounded by the sound of the Pacific Ocean and the easy laughter of my comrades, I felt a sense of belonging that had eluded me my entire life. These people, bound to me not by blood but by shared service and mutual respect, were my family. This was a family built on honor. The final piece of the healing process came from the most unexpected place. One evening, my phone rang with an unfamiliar Los Angeles area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Maisie?" The voice on the other end was hesitant, fragile. It was Sam. There was a long, awkward silence. "Hi, Sam," I finally said, my voice neutral. "Maisie, I'm so sorry," she stammered, and the words sounded like they were being torn from her. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since that night. I talked to Dad. I pushed him. He admitted it. He admitted everything. She told me how, after I'd left the disastrous dinner party, she had confronted them. It wasn't easy. There were denials, accusations, and tears, my mother's specialty. But Sam, the tenacious lawyer, had pinned them down with relentless questions until the truth unraveled. I was so blind, Sam confessed, her voice thick with shame. I was so wrapped up in my own success, so busy being the golden child, that I never stopped to look at what they were doing to you. I'm sorry I believed their lies. I'm sorry I wasn't a sister to you." Her apology, though painfully late, began to melt a wall of ice around my heart that I didn't even know was there. It couldn't erase 4 years of pain, but it was a start. It was the first brick in a bridge I never thought could be rebuilt. We talked for over an hour, the first real conversation we'd had in years. It was halting and difficult, but it was honest, and in that honesty, I felt a flicker of hope. Then, just as we were about to hang up, she dropped the bomb. It was unintentional. A stray piece of information she shared out of frustration. "They just don't change, Maisie," she said with an exasperated sigh. "Can you believe this? They're planning a big family appreciation dinner. They've invited the whole extended family again. And you know what the theme is?" I waited, a cold dread beginning to creep up my spine. "It's to honor Sam for saving the family home." The line went quiet. I couldn't speak. The shock was more profound, more devastating than the playing soldier comment. This wasn't just an insult. This wasn't just neglect. This was erasure. They were actively, publicly, rewriting history. They were taking my sacrifice, my 4 years of ramen noodles and canceled dreams, and turning it into a trophy for my sister. They were making me a ghost in my own story, crowning her for a victory she had never fought. A cold, controlled rage, the kind I had only ever felt in combat, ignited in my chest. This was no longer about money. This was about honor. This was about the truth. The battle wasn't over. It had just entered a new, more dangerous phase. A few days after my call with Sam, the hope we had tentatively built was utterly annihilated. I was reviewing personnel files in my office when my phone buzzed with a text from an old Marine buddy. He had recently transferred to Miramar and was living in the San Diego area. "Hey, isn't this your parents' place?" the text read. "Your sister must be awesome." Attached was a photo. I tapped to open it, and for a moment, my heart stopped. The image was of my childhood home, the familiar stucco walls and manicured lawn I'd fought to save. But stretched across the front of the house, tied to the pillars of the porch, was a massive, garish vinyl banner. The kind you see at a grand opening for a car dealership. The letters, printed in bold white against a royal blue background, were impossible to miss. "Congratulations, Sam, for saving the family home." I stared at the picture, the phone growing cold in my hand. The rage that ignited inside me wasn't hot and chaotic. It was ice. It was a cold, sharp, crystalline fury that brought with it a terrifying clarity. They had done the unthinkable. They had taken their private lie and turned it into a public monument. They had erected a statue to their deception on the very foundation of my sacrifice. This wasn't just an insult anymore. This was a public execution of the truth. But I didn't crumble. I didn't cry. The daughter in me was long gone. Major Black took over. I went into operational mode. I swiveled to my government-issued laptop and began what the military calls intelligence gathering. This was no longer a messy family dispute. It was a fact-finding mission. The objective? To build an irrefutable case. I logged into my Navy Federal Credit Union account and began the tedious process of downloading 4 years of bank statements. With each click, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. The printer in my office whirred to life, spitting out page after page of my financial history. A paper trail of their deception. Next, I scrolled through years of text messages. I took screenshots of every desperate plea from my mother, every hollow promise of repayment, every guilt-laced manipulation. The water heater exploded. "We need $800 by tomorrow." Followed a week later by a photo she'd sent me of her new designer handbag. I saved every email, every digital breadcrumb. I didn't just collect the data, I organized it. I arranged everything chronologically in a secure folder, creating a damning timeline of their 4-year campaign of financial and emotional exploitation. This wasn't a collection of bitter memories anymore. It was an evidence locker. This wasn't about hurt feelings. This was an investigation. I was no longer a wounded daughter. I was an officer preparing an after-action review, and I was going to deliver it with brutal precision. As I was compiling the final documents, my phone rang. It was Sam again, her voice frantic and laced with outrage. "Maisie, I swear I knew nothing about that banner," she burst out, not even waiting for me to say hello. "I just saw it on Aunt Carol's Facebook page." She posted a picture of it with the caption, "So proud of my niece, Sam." I feel sick. I called Mom and Dad, and they tried to gaslight me, saying it was just a small misunderstanding. She took a ragged breath. "They're telling everyone that I gave them a huge lump sum to pay off all their debts. They're using my name, my career, to sell this lie. Maisie, they're making me an accomplice." The shame and anger in her voice were palpable. She had been used too, just in a different way. In that moment, a decision formed in my mind, cold and absolute. I was no longer on the defensive. It was time to go on the offensive. "Don't do anything, Sam," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Don't call them. Don't post anything. Just act normal." "What?" "Maisie, I have to." "No," I interrupted, the command in my tone stopping her cold. "I'm coming to San Diego. This weekend, I'm going to that party." A beat of stunned silence. "Are you sure?" she finally asked, her voice a whisper. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied. The moment I hung up, I was on the airline website, booking a one-way flight from John Wayne Airport to San Diego. I packed a single carry-on bag. I didn't pack an evening gown or party clothes. Instead, I carefully selected my most formidable power suit, a sharp charcoal gray blazer and matching trousers that I privately referred to as my civilian dress blues. It was my uniform for this new kind of war. My leather briefcase didn't contain personal items. It held my laptop, a portable printer, and a thick file folder meticulously organized and tabbed. It was an arsenal of facts. As I sat on the plane, watching the sprawling suburbs of Southern California glide by beneath the clouds, I felt no fear. There was no anxiety, no nervous knot in my stomach. There was only a profound and total clarity. This was my mission. I wasn't flying home as a victim seeking pity or an apology. I wasn't the broken daughter looking for a moment of reconciliation. I was returning as Major Maisie Black of the United States Marine Corps. And I was on my way to enforce a non-negotiable code of conduct and restore order based on the one value that had been trampled and discarded: the truth. If you've ever had to gather your own evidence just to prove you weren't crazy, hit that like button. And tell me in the comments, just one word, what weapon you would bring to a fight for your own truth: facts or feelings. Landing in San Diego felt different this time. I wasn't coming home. I was deploying to a forward operating base. I bypassed the familiar route to my parents' neighborhood and instead checked into a nondescript business hotel in the heart of downtown. My room, with its neutral colors and anonymous efficiency, immediately became my command center. There was no time to waste. I didn't unpack my clothes, I unpacked my mission. I connected my laptop to the room's large flat-screen TV via an HDMI cable, turning it into a massive monitor for reviewing my intelligence. The evidence I'd gathered, bank statements, screenshots, emails, was no longer a chaotic collection of painful memories. It was raw data, and my job was to refine it into an undeniable narrative, a prosecutorial argument. I knew I couldn't walk into that party and just start yelling. An emotional outburst would be dismissed as hysteria. I had to be colder, more methodical. I had to present my case with the unimpeachable logic of an officer briefing a general. My feelings were irrelevant. The facts were everything. I spent the entire afternoon building my weapon. It wasn't a rifle, it was a PowerPoint presentation. This was my battlefield, and slides were my ammunition. I created a title slide, the text stark and official against a plain black background. Operation Family Support, a 48-month financial after-action review, presented by Major Maisie Black. Each slide was constructed with the precision of an intelligence analyst. I didn't just list numbers, I visualized them. One slide featured a bar graph starkly illustrating the escalating payment amounts over time, showing how a one-time request had metastasized into a chronic dependency. Another slide was a communications log, featuring a timeline of my mother's increasingly frantic text messages, their emotional content starkly at odds with their financial demands. Before finalizing the presentation, I made a call. Not to a friend, but to a contact at the base's legal services office, the JAG Corps. I didn't need to sue. I needed to be precise. I spent 20 minutes on the phone with a sharp young Navy lawyer, clarifying the language I should use. I wasn't accusing them of a crime, but I wanted my words to have the weight of legal accuracy. We discussed terms like financial records, verbal commitments, and patterns of solicitation. The consultation armed me with a new layer of authority. The deadliest slide, the one I spent the most time on, I titled Discrepancy Analysis. It was a simple 2-column layout. On the left, I pasted screenshots of their desperate pleas for money. The property tax is due Friday. We're short $200. The car needs a new engine. It's a disaster. We can't afford groceries this week, Maisie. On the right, directly parallel to each plea, I pasted the corresponding evidence from their social media. Next to the property tax plea was a photo of my mother's new Tory Burch sandals, posted the same weekend. Next to the broken-down car was a shot of my father at a Chargers game in a corporate box. And next to the claim that they couldn't afford groceries was a picture of them dining at Mr. A's, one of San Diego's most expensive restaurants, with the city lights twinkling below. It was a devastating, irrefutable diptych of their lies. Late that afternoon, there was a soft knock on the door. It was Sam. It was the first time we had seen each other in person in months, and the air was thick with unspoken history. There was no awkward hug. Her lawyer's eyes immediately went to the TV screen, where my discrepancy analysis slide was displayed. She took a sharp breath, her face hardening. "My God," she whispered, shaking her head. "They won't know what hit them." She became my strategic counsel. For the next hour, we were no longer sisters caught in a family drama. We were a legal team preparing for a hearing. She paced the hotel room, firing off suggestions with the rapid precision of a litigator. "Don't call them Mom and Dad during the presentation," she advised, her tone sharp. "Refer to them by their names, Charles and Elaine. It creates a professional and emotional distance. It signals that you are no longer operating as their child." She pulled out her phone and went through the guest list for the party, confirming who would be there. She helped me identify potential allies, like our Aunt Judith, my father's older sister, a stern, no-nonsense woman who valued integrity above all else. We also flagged the inevitable loyalists who would defend my parents no matter what. We were mapping the terrain, assessing the loyalties. We were a united front, an alliance forged in the crucible of truth. That evening, after Sam left, I didn't go out. The city buzzed with life below my window. But my world had narrowed to this room, this mission. I ordered room service, a simple club sandwich, and a bottle of water. I performed my pre-battle rituals. I took out my black leather pumps and polished them until they shone, using the same circular motions I used on my military-issue combat boots. I meticulously pressed my charcoal gray suit, ensuring every crease was sharp, every line perfect. Each action was a meditation, a way of focusing my mind and steadying my nerves. I didn't need to rehearse the presentation again. The slides, the facts, the narrative. It was all seared into my memory. I stood before the full-length mirror next to the closet. I looked at my own reflection, not with criticism or doubt, but with a quiet assessment. I didn't see the overlooked daughter. I didn't see the soldier on duty. I saw a whole person, a woman who had been broken down and rebuilt, stronger and more resilient than before. A woman ready to reclaim her own story. I took one last, slow, deep breath. It was time. I walked into the party like a soldier entering hostile territory. The living room was packed with the familiar faces of my extended family, a sea of relatives buzzing with cheerful, oblivious chatter. At the center of it all, holding court near the fireplace, were my parents, Charles and Elaine. They were radiant, soaking in the praise and congratulations meant for Sam. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of clinking wine glasses. It was their perfect stage, and they were the stars. The moment they saw me, their smiles faltered for a fraction of a second before being plastered back on, wider and more artificial than before. "Maisie, darling, what a surprise. You came without telling us," Elaine exclaimed, rushing forward to envelop me in a cloud of Chanel No. 5. She reached for a hug, the classic maneuver to absorb me into the charade. I took a single, deliberate step back. It was a small movement, but it was a definitive rejection. Her arms fell awkwardly to her sides. "I came for the dedication," I said, my voice cool and even, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Ignoring her stunned expression, I walked directly to the large flat-screen TV mounted above the fireplace, the centerpiece of their stage. With calm, practiced movements, I opened my briefcase, took out my laptop and an HDMI cable, and began connecting it to the television. A subtle shift rippled through the room. Conversations nearest to me faltered. The background laughter seemed to dim as heads began to turn. A palpable tension began to seep into the festive atmosphere, a silent question mark hanging in the air. My father, oblivious or perhaps willfully ignorant, chose that moment to begin the main event. He raised his champagne flute high. "Friends, family," he began, his voice booming. "Tonight, we are here to honor someone truly special, someone whose success and generosity have saved this family." That was my cue. "Excuse me for interrupting," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and resonant, cutting through his speech like a blade. Every eye in the room snapped to me. "Before the celebration begins, I would like to present a few facts. My father stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. Before he could object, I hit a key on my laptop. The TV screen flickered to life, bathing the silent room in a cold, digital glow. The title slide appeared, stark and unadorned. Operation Family Support, a 48-month financial after-action review. A dead silence fell over the room. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. My mother's face was a mask of horror. My father's was turning a dangerous shade of red. Ignoring them, I began. I clicked to the first slide. My voice was calm, methodical. The voice of an officer delivering a briefing. This operation commenced on February 15, 2021, and concluded 48 months later. I presented the data without emotion, without accusation. The bar graph showing the payments, the communications log with my mother's texts, the devastating side-by-side comparison of their pleas for help versus their luxurious social media posts. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get angry. I simply presented the evidence, letting the cold, hard facts speak for themselves. The truth was my only weapon. My father finally broke, his voice trembling with rage. "This is hardly appropriate, Maisie. This is a private family matter." I turned from the screen and looked directly at him, my gaze steady. "The truth is the truth, Charles," I replied, using his first name, as Sam had advised. The effect was immediate. It stripped him of his paternal authority. Whether or not it's embarrassing depends entirely on one's actions. I clicked to the final slide, the kill shot. The image that had started it all filled the screen, the garish blue and white banner. The photo was high resolution. Every word was crystal clear. "This banner," I said, my voice ringing with finality in the silent room, "is a public lie." I turned my gaze to Sam. She was standing frozen near the bar, her face pale with a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension as she stared at the screen, finally understanding the true scale of the deception. "Sam did not save this house," I declared, my voice resonating with 4 years of suppressed truth. Her successful career did not fund the lifestyle of Charles and Elaine. I gestured toward my parents. My salary as a United States Marine did. "You shut your mouth!" my mother shrieked, her carefully constructed composure finally shattering. "You ungrateful!" But it was too late. The truth was out. The bomb had detonated, and the fallout was inescapable. The carefully curated image they had spent a lifetime building had just been demolished in front of the entire family. Into the stunned, ringing silence, a single, sharp sound cut through the air. Clap. It was my Aunt Judith, my father's older sister. She was a formidable woman, a retired school principal whom everyone in the family respected and slightly feared. She was slowly, deliberately getting to her feet. Clap, clap. "Well," she said, her voice dry and laced with steel as she looked directly at her younger brother. "It's about time someone enforced some discipline in this family." Her eyes, filled with profound disappointment, were all the verdict he needed. And then something even more powerful happened. From across the room, Sam began to move. She walked with a quiet, determined grace, navigating through the frozen statues of our relatives. She walked past our parents, who stood there, utterly broken and exposed. She didn't look at them. Her eyes were fixed on me. She came to a stop right next to me, shoulder to shoulder. In front of everyone, she placed a hand on my arm, a silent, unshakable gesture of solidarity. It was a tectonic shift in the family's landscape, a transfer of allegiance from the old guard built on lies to a new generation, aligned with the truth. We stood there, together, facing them. No longer the golden child and the scapegoat. Just 2 women, 2 sisters, standing on the right side of history. The old order had fallen. After Sam and I walked out of that silent, devastated living room, we didn't say a word. We just got in her car and drove. The adrenaline that had fueled my presentation drained away, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The feeling of victory wasn't the sweet, triumphant rush I might have expected. It was a hollow ache. It was the feeling a soldier gets after a long and brutal battle. A quiet, somber exhaustion. I had won the war for the truth, but the price was the final, smoking ruin of any illusion I had left of a whole and happy family. In the days that followed, the aftershocks began. My phone started buzzing again, but this time the messages were different. There were no more accusations, no more guilt tripping. Instead, there were hesitant texts and voicemails from aunts, uncles, and cousins. "I'm so sorry, Maisie," one text from my aunt read. "We never knew." Another from a cousin said, "I had no idea. I'm just shocked." I read them and then deleted them. I didn't reply. I appreciated the sentiment, but I didn't need their belated sympathy. I didn't need to be validated by the same people who had silently watched me be invisible for years. More than anything, I just needed quiet. I needed to process the sheer scale of the crater I had created in the middle of my own life. A week later, while Sam and I were sitting at a small beachfront cafe in Encinitas, watching the surfers ride the waves, a different kind of aftershock arrived. It was an email forwarded to me by Sam from my parents' lawyer. It was formal, cold, and utterly clueless. It was an offer. As a gesture of reconciliation and goodwill, they were offering to compensate me for my past contributions by adding my name to the deed of the house. I read the email on my phone and let out a short, bitter laugh. I showed the screen to Sam. "They still don't get it," I said, shaking my head as I watched a pelican dive into the ocean. After all of that, they still think this was about money. They think they can buy my silence, buy my loyalty, with a piece of paper. They thought they could solve a problem of the heart with a real estate transaction. Sam put her coffee cup down, her expression serious and her eyes full of a sincerity I hadn't seen since we were children. "Then, let me," she said quietly. "Let me pay you back, Maisie. All of it. The whole $84,000. I can liquidate some stocks. I can." I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers, stopping her. "No, Sam," I said gently. "I don't need it." She looked genuinely confused. "But that's your future. Your down payment, your transition fund. You said it yourself." "No," I said, my voice firm with a newfound clarity. "My future is what I build for myself, starting now." I squeezed her hand. What I needed wasn't the money. I've been making my own way for years. I'll be fine. What I needed was for the truth to be heard. What I needed was for someone to stand with me. I looked her straight in the eye, letting her see the profound gratitude I felt. "And you gave me that, Sam. When you walked across that room and stood by my side. For me, that single act was worth more than $84,000. That was enough." Tears welled in her eyes, and in mine. For the first time, we weren't looking at each other through the distorted lens of parental favoritism and assigned roles. We were just two sisters, seeing each other for who we truly were, bound by a shared, painful truth and the tentative hope of a new beginning. That night, back in my quiet hotel room before my flight back to base, I knew there was one last thing I had to do. One final boundary to draw. I wasn't going to call them. A phone call would lead to arguments, tears, and more manipulation. This needed to be a final, definitive statement. I sat down and wrote a short, formal letter. Not to Mom and Dad, but to Charles and Elaine. I addressed it to their lawyer, ensuring the message would be delivered without any emotional filter. The letter was brief. "I have received your offer, and I decline it. I do not require my name on the deed to that house, nor do I require anything else from you. My fight was never about property. It was about the truth. I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. This forgiveness is a gift I'm giving to myself, not to you. It is the act of setting a prisoner free and realizing that prisoner was me. My boundaries, however, are now clear and non-negotiable. This is the last communication you will receive from me. Please do not attempt to contact me again. Goodbye." I folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and made arrangements to have it messengered to the lawyer's office the next morning. The moment I sent the final confirmation email, I felt the last, heaviest weight lift from my soul. The war was finally over. The aftershocks had settled. I had closed the book on the longest, most painful chapter of my life. It was a somber, lonely act, but it was also the most liberating thing I had ever done. 1 year later, The final letter I wrote marked more than just the end of a painful chapter. It was the beginning of a completely new book. After much soul-searching, I made a bold decision. I submitted my papers for an honorable discharge from the Marine Corps, choosing to leave on my own terms, with my head held high. A major defense technology firm in Seattle had made me an offer to become their new director of operations, and I accepted. The change of scenery was absolute, a deliberate baptism into a new life. I traded the sun-scorched deserts of Southern California for the lush, evergreen hills of the Pacific Northwest. I used the savings I'd finally been able to accumulate, along with my hard-earned VA loan benefits, to buy a small but beautiful condo in a quiet neighborhood with a balcony that looked out onto the majestic, snow-capped peak of Mount Rainier. My life found a new, peaceful rhythm. There were no more frantic late-night phone calls, no more financial anxieties that weren't my own, no more walking on eggshells. My days were filled with challenging, meaningful work, leveraging the logistical skills I'd honed in the Corps. My weekends were filled with long hikes through misty pine forests, the air clean and sharp in my lungs. My evenings were spent in quiet solitude, reading by the fireplace with a cup of tea, the silence no longer feeling empty, but full of peace. But I knew this new life couldn't just be about my own comfort. The pain I had endured wasn't meaningless. It had forged me into someone stronger, someone wiser. It had taught me a lesson I felt compelled to share. Every Saturday morning, I drive south to a Veterans Resource Center in Tacoma. There, in a small, unassuming conference room, I volunteer to lead a workshop I created myself. I call it Operation Financial Independence. My audience is young soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, many of whom are just like I was, full of honor, duty, and a loyalty that can easily be exploited. I teach them the basics: how to budget on military pay, how to understand the benefits of their VA loan, how to plan for their future. But the most important part of the workshop is the last module. It's the one I call Guarding Your Six, military slang for watching your back. In that module, I teach them how to recognize the warning signs of financial exploitation, especially when it comes from the people they trust the most, their own families. I give them the language to set firm, healthy boundaries. I share my own story, not with bitterness or anger, but with the calm strength of a survivor. I tell them that their duty to their family does not require them to sacrifice their own future. I tell them that a request for help and a demand for a blank check are two very different things. And I watch as a quiet understanding dawns in their eyes, the same understanding that took me years of pain to acquire. My deepest wound had become my greatest strength. My personal battle had become my public mission. My relationship with Sam, once a source of quiet resentment, has blossomed into the truest friendship of my life. She flies up from LA to visit almost every month. We hike the trails around Mount Rainier. We cook together in my small kitchen. We talk about everything and nothing. We have rebuilt our sisterhood on a new foundation, one of absolute honesty and mutual respect. She has become my closest friend, the ally I'd always wished for. We don't talk much about our parents. We don't need to. Their chapter is closed. Our future is ours to write, together. The story ends here, on a quiet Tuesday morning. I'm standing on my balcony, a warm mug of coffee in my hands. The air is crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. I'm watching the first rays of dawn creep over the horizon, painting the snow-covered peak of Mount Rainier in shades of soft pink and brilliant gold. It's a new day, a self-made dawn. I step back inside, open a fresh journal, and on the first clean white page, I write the opening line to the next chapter of my life. Year 1 of a free life. I had fought many battles in my career as a Marine, but I had finally won the most important one, the battle for my own life, my own honor, and my own future. I was no longer a soldier following orders. I was the commanding officer of my own destiny. Finally, in the quiet peace of this new morning, I was truly home. Thank you for listening to my story. Watching this self-made dawn, I'm reminded that my battle, while personal, is not unique. This journey taught me that our true worth isn't determined by the family we're born into, but by the honor with which we build our own lives and the peace we fight to secure for ourselves. If my story resonated with you, I invite you to claim your own new beginning in the comments by simply writing, My Dawn. For more stories about reclaiming your power, please subscribe to the channel and share this with someone who needs to hear they're not alone.